to tell people I became an atheist. I like to say that I admitted that I was an atheist. Because even though I was raised in a Christian home by Christian parents, I never really believed. And it's not that I didn't want to, because I remember having, from the time I first learned I was mortal, this sense of panicked terror at the thought of death. And the idea of God and an afterlife and something about us that is eternal and lives on beyond death, it was very, very appealing to me. And for many, many years, for most of my life, in fact, I tried very hard to believe in something like that. I even went through a phase for a while where I lent some credibility to people like John Edward and psychics, people who claimed that they could talk to the dead. And yet, those thoughts, those beliefs, never brought me any comfort. They never brought me any relief from my sense of fear about my inevitable death, because deep down, I never believed any of them. I never had any reason to think that they were true. I completely understand why people, even very, very intelligent, rational people, feel compelled to cling to notions not just of traditional religious beliefs like Christianity and belief in salvation through Christ and heaven and things like that, but also to beliefs in things like ghosts. We tell each other ghost stories to scare each other. We always sort of position ghosts as along the same lines as vampires and werewolves and zombies and these other frightening things. But I think the real reason why ghost stories and sincere belief in the existence of ghosts is still so prevalent among people is not because we find them scary, but because we find them comforting. This is Antietam Battlefield near Sharpsburg, Maryland. 150 years ago, it was the site of the Battle of Antietam. More Americans were killed that day than in any other single day in American history. It was a bad day. And if any place was going to be haunted, this would be the place. And in fact, a lot of people believe that very thing. This part of the battlefield is called the Bloody Lane, and it was the site of some of the fiercest fighting of the day. It's said that when fighting ended at the Bloody Lane, there were Confederate bodies piled up in the sunken road 3 or 4 deep. I grew up in this area, and now I live just a few minutes from here, so of course I've heard stories for my entire life about how haunted this place is. People say that you come here at night, you'll hear noises, you'll hear the sounds of troops advancing, you'll hear musket fire. Some people claim that they've seen things, they've seen soldiers in Union or Confederate uniforms walking by, just glimpsed out of the corner of their eyes. Personally, I've never seen or heard anything ghostly at Antietam, and I've driven through here at night. I've gotten out of the car and climbed up on the monuments, done all the things you're not supposed to do overnight in the battlefield when it's closed, and I've never seen a ghost or felt threatened or felt like any place that I was haunted, and that includes back in the days when I was a lot more credulous than I am now. But lots of people tell very different stories about this place. In fact, to many in this area, this battlefield is the most haunted place they've ever been to. And it's not really difficult for me to understand how they could feel that way. After all, when you realize what happened here, it is kind of a creepy place, especially after dark. But I've never felt uncomfortable here, no matter what time of day it was. And as far as it being the most haunted place in the area, it's not even the spookiest place I've been to in the last year. That title belongs to the Victor Cullen Center, this abandoned ruin of a building that was once a tuberculosis hospital and then was used as part of a juvenile detention facility before finally being left to crumble. It's the sort of place horror movies are set, and in fact, I would really love to shoot a horror movie there. In fact, that's what I was doing there with my wife and a friend of ours when I shot this footage last year. Being there and wandering its silent hallways and exploring its empty rooms was a really unique experience. It's old and it hasn't been used for anything for years, and yet so many of the rooms are still filled with artifacts of the people that were there. There are letters that people didn't take with them. There's old furniture, a big empty day room that compels you to wonder about the people that were here. And in fact, I know who one of the people was that was there. That's my own grandmother. My father's mother had tuberculosis in the 1950s and spent a year at the Victor Cullen Center. She still talks about it sometimes. She calls it Up on the Hill. Do I think there are ghosts in the Victor Cullen Center? Well, I don't believe in the supernatural, but I suppose it could depend on what you mean by ghosts. I am not immune to the sorts of experiences that people report having when they think that they've encountered a haunting or a ghost. I know what these things feel like, which I suppose begs the question, how can these experiences and feelings be explained, and what can they mean to an atheist? Well, I'm certainly not an expert on these things, but I can explain to you how I personally make sense of them and what meaning I take from those sorts of experiences. And to me, the key to the whole thing is right here. Our brains are really, really good at drawing conclusions, at finding connections between things. Whether or not those connections are real is another story. We have this instinctive need to explain things and to have things make sense. And when things don't make sense, that's very difficult for us to accept. There's a function of our brains, of our perception, called closure. Closure is the brain's ability to reach conclusions, to span the gap between two data points. And when we experience something that we can't immediately explain, when we hear a noise and we can't tell exactly where the noise comes from, or when we see something out of the corner of our eye and then we look and there's nothing there, we need to explain where that came from. So our brains fill in the gaps, and if there aren't any facts to fill the gaps in with, we use something else. And in the case of a place like the Victor Cullen Center, where you see this ruin of a building, this abandoned place that was the site of who knows how much pain and suffering and sadness, and then the building itself is just sort of this sad derelict. I mean, I think in cases like that, if we have a spooky experience in that setting, we fill in the gaps to explain those experiences with empathy, with our own sense of compassion, with our own sense of sadness. I mean, you're standing in a place where who knows how much pain and suffering took place, or who knows how many people lived out months, maybe even years of their lives away from their loved ones, away from their family and friends. And to me, it only makes sense that we might associate those feelings and that knowledge with the unexplained experiences that we might encounter in a place like that. It's the same thing with where I'm at right now, the Antietam battlefield. So much death occurred here. This was the site of a minor cataclysm in human history, and of course people are going to have that on their minds. People are going to be thinking about that while they're here. I said a few minutes ago that I think the main reason why people believe in ghosts isn't to scare themselves, but to comfort themselves. I think a lot of people take a great deal of comfort in feeling like the soldiers that died at Antietam are not gone, that they're still around somewhere, that the people in the Victor Cullen Center are still with us in some way. And even if we interpret these experiences to mean that somehow these people have been trapped, or that they can't get away from the site of their death, or that their existence has become some sort of prolonged torment, maybe we can tell ourselves, well, at least they haven't been forgotten. At least the soldiers who died at Antietam didn't die in vain. We can tell ourselves that they never really died. They're still here in some way. Their spirits are still walking these fields. And I think whether they mean for it to be that, whether they intend for it to be that or not, a lot of people take a great deal of comfort from that. I know when I was trying to cling to any sense of belief in an afterlife, I would have been comforted by that, even if I would have had to acknowledge that, yeah, sure, the life of a ghost wandering the battlefield where they were killed has to kind of suck. At least it's a life. It's better than no life at all. At least it's it's some indication that there's more to us, that we go on beyond this life. And when I was at that place in my life where I really wanted that, I really coveted that feeling, the idea of a ghost, of a haunting, of knowing that there was life after death, would have been very, very comforting to me. But like I said, I never really took any comfort from it because I never truly believed it. I never actually thought that things like God or an afterlife or a soul or a spirit or ghosts were real. And one of the things that I had to finally do when I accepted the fact that I was an atheist, and I decided to stop denying it and to start calling myself an atheist and sort of own it and embrace it, was to explain all of these things in a more naturalistic way, in a scientific way, in a way that I could know was true. I was thinking about this the other day, and I thought about a time when I was a young kid. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and I and my brother were home with our babysitter. And it was the middle of the day, it was summer, and we were all off school, and we were just hanging out in the living room at my house, and the door to my bedroom was most of the way closed, but not latched, and it would open and close itself. And it would do this every couple of seconds. It would open a little bit and then close, and every once in a while it would open a little bit and then it would slam shut, and it wouldn't latch because of the way my doorknob was, but it would slam shut, make a big loud bang against the door jamb, and then it would drift open again. And my babysitter and my brother and I developed this little story that we told ourselves, that it was a ghost, and we would ask the ghost questions, and it would respond by opening or closing the bedroom door. And what it was the window in my bedroom was open, and as the wind blew in and the air pressure changed inside the room, the door would either open or close based on the change in pressure. That is what was causing the door to move, not a ghost, not anything supernatural. Perfectly natural explanation. And maybe at the time I would have rather it was a ghost, but I guess it's just a sign of how I've changed and my way of thinking has evolved over the years. Now I think that the real explanation, the scientific explanation, the open window and the wind and the change in the air pressure, is a far more satisfying explanation than it was a ghost. Look, take my word for it. The real world, the physical, natural universe as it actually is always more interesting and more satisfying and more beautiful than the world of the spirit world or hauntings or ghosts. In fact, don't take my word for it. Go out and see for yourself.